possible.
Right. I think we can start on this one officially. I mean, it's there's a few people already in the group. Welcome everyone. My name is Ray. It will be the unusual host tonight. So Paul is just on the background. It will be just helping with the technical part, but I'm gonna try not to interfere too much to listen my accent and voice. But thanks to everyone who get the packages from the website. I know there was a few different options. We have two interesting cigars tonight, as already some of the people mentioned: Camacho Connecticut Robusto and Avo Heritage Short Robusto. Two completely different cigars. We're going to pair that with a selection of Glenfiddich whiskies, and we have a few interesting guests tonight. Roy Zomer, the managing director of Davidoff in UK and Netherlands, I believe now.
Something like that, yeah.
We have
UK, Ireland, and the Netherlands now. Yes.
Nice. We have George Rami or Remy. Apologize about that. He's the brand ambassador of Camacho and AVO, and we have Mark Thompson from Glenfiddich. So great bunch of people. We're going to talk a lot about cigars and whiskey, and yeah, I'll pass the mic.
And we have Jack hire as well, which now he's pretty much replacing me on the road as the road warrior, as the new Camacho ambassador on the road.
Very
I'm
nice.
still doing all sorts of things, but yeah, he's the road warrior now. Just wanted to someone introduce him. That's
welcome Jack.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to be here.
Nice. And I'll pass the mic to Roy, so Roy can introduce the cigar, maybe with George and Jack, and explain what we smoked first. And yeah,
I think as we kind of said before we started recording, you have the Camacho Connecticut Robusto and the Avo Heritage Short Robusto, and probably the Camacho Connecticut is probably the right cigar to start off with. As Mark kind of adhered to in his short intro, that he suggests starting with the 15, then moving over to the 12, and then finish with the 18. But we'll talk about Glenfiddich a little bit later. Let's get into the first cigar. I think George and Jack, welcome from the States. I believe it's just past 1 o'clock in the afternoon for you guys.
Yep.
So here's people all winding down from the long day at work. So
it's not too early for
Nice.
Glenfiddich, though. We just nobody has to publish. We'll just hope nobody from the office sees this recording, right? They don't have to know. If we're starting with the George, how about I take the Camacho Connecticut and you can talk about the Avo Classic? That's how we'll do it.
Sure.
So if you're starting with the Camacho Connecticut, first of all, if you've never tried a Camacho before, if you're not familiar with Davidoff, Avo, or Camacho, I'll give you a primer on Camacho. Here in the States, especially, and abroad, Camacho is like a live loud is kind of our mantra, and it is a bold cigar company that focuses on intense blends and intense flavors. Now, if you're smoking a Camacho Connecticut, you might not think of the word intense and Connecticut or bold and Connecticut as being similar or used in the same sentence, but that's why this specific cigar is one of the best sellers in the Camacho portfolio, because it is a Connecticut, and while it does have some milder flavor and you could smoke it any time of day, it still has a really good intensity of flavor. It has a little bit of nicotine kick. It's not, this is a term that gets overused a little bit, but it's not your grandfather's Connecticut. It's got a good amount of spice, in my opinion. And the flavor profile, I think, would pair really well with some whiskey. So the blend on that is the wrapper is an Ecuadorian Connecticut. The binder is from Honduras. Our factory is in Honduras, so a lot of our tobaccos and our blends are prevalent with Honduran tobacco. And then we have some filler tobacco from both the Dominican Republic, and we have some Honduran tobacco in the filler. So if you're lighting that up, some flavors that I get from the Connecticut are like a toasted cedar kind of. I get some spice, but like baking spice. So a little bit of that sort of thing. And George, anything that I missed there? What do you have to add? You've been at this for a bit longer than I have.
Yeah. So basically, like you were explaining, right? So Camacho Connecticut is our workhorse, right? It's believe it or not, we are the makers of the boldest cigars in the world and all that. But the Camacho Connecticut is our best-selling cigar, just the next one would be Corojo, but the Connecticut really is the best-selling one. And this one basically is the one that knocks right at your door. It doesn't plow through the door like all the other blends that we have. Like Jack was saying, the wrapper, it's a Connecticut Ecuadorian wrapper. The filler is a Honduran Corojo. So all of our cigars, aside from one that I can recall, which was the Camacho Check 6, it was a limited edition, part of the Brotherhood series. All of our cigars have Corojo in them. That being in the wrapper, binder, filler. That could be, you know, three different fillers or just one, but all of our cigars have it. This one has it in the binder, right? And then the two other fillers that compose the cigar are the Generoso, which is a proprietary seed that we have in Honduras, and Alemán Ligero, which is a German engineer seed that was pretty much discovered and the strains were put together in Germany, and then that's what's been used right now that we use in Honduras for that one. And like Jack was mentioning, all cigars are made in our state-of-the-art factory in Honduras, which is the name of it is Diadema Cigars, and it's a very impressive operation. Actually, Roy, we never talked about this. Is there, an opportunity of getting a group down to Honduras to come to the factory?
It's on my bucket list to do.
It should, man. It should.
Yeah.
It should.
I'll carry your luggage.
Yeah, there you go.
Well. No, because if you look at cigar countries, production, etc. I've been to Dominican Republic, I've been to Nicaragua, I've been to Cuba, and I tried to go to Honduras during COVID actually, when I was in Nicaragua. And Nestor Plasencia told me, said, we can get you into Honduras, but probably not back into Nicaragua. So yeah, that was kind of the risk I had to take. But, the risk.
And that was in 2020?
That was in 2020, yeah.
Oh man! Oh, that must have been.
You're
like
cutting it
February.
close.
I think we did talk about it. That was probably like what, February?
Yeah, I did this. I was there in December 20.
In December, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
A couple of
It was
couple of months before, shit hit the fan.
I think the last time we did one of these, Roy, were you not there at the time?
There was actually. I was just. I was in Costa Rica.
You were zooming in from a balcony in Costa Rica, making everybody else really jealous.
Nice.
I had to fly from London to Costa Rica because there was no flights into Nicaragua, and from Costa Rica I had to take a bus into Nicaragua to get there.
Yeah,
You really earned that trip.
There's still little things, with COVID. Like I went probably like 6 or 7 times this year down to Honduras, and they were still wearing the masks, and you still had to present your negative test, blah blah blah. But I my last trip was in March, and they had lifted all the bans and all the stuff. So thankfully, now it's just back to normal.
Yeah.
So it'd be a great idea to get a trip,
Absolutely.
put a trip together to go down there.
I think one of the things I want to touch base on is the tobaccos, especially the filler tobaccos you mentioned, because they are maybe tobaccos you don't see that often, especially Generoso, and also kind of the Alemán Ligero. It's not something you really see around that often. So what makes them so special or rare in that case?
So the Generoso, it's a strain that is a hybrid of I believe Criollo, Corojo, and drawing a blank here. So it's percentages of those two plus this other one, which is, what is it? Oh my God. It'll come back to me. So it's a hybrid between those two, right? And then this is a strain that was pretty much created by Julio Iroa's father, right? And that strain is the one that's been used ever since, right? And that one is the Honduran one. The Alemán Ligero, that one, I'm not really sure the background of it prior to our usage within the Davidoff family. But that was that was Hankey's input basically into the making of the Camacho Connecticut. So that's another thing. So Davidoff purchased Camacho in 2008, and the Camacho Connecticut was released in 2009, and that was the first joint venture between the previous owners and Hankey Kellner. So Hankey pretty much is the master of making mild, savory, that triggers all parts of your palate cigars. And Christian obviously, has a great background in tobacco blending as well. So these two came together, and that's where the Camacho Connecticut came about. I always try to find out a little bit more information about the Alemán Ligero. And I actually even asked Hanky that, but I couldn't get a definitive answer as to which strains or how this was created in Germany. I just go with what I've learned throughout the past 10 years.
Yeah. So they are quite unusual. But the main thing, as you mentioned, is that Corojo tobacco is in pretty much every Camacho blend.
Yeah, it's what gives it what I like to call our signature taste and aroma, right? Because it does have a very distinctive leathery flavor profile and smell to it, right? The best way of actually experiencing that is one of the things that we go, you've probably experienced it yourself when we go down there, or whenever our master blenders are tasting different types of tobacco before they purchase it, they roll them into cylinders, right? Which is not a full blend. It's just the binder and filler of whichever strain you want to taste, right? And that's where you actually get to see some of the spiciness and some of the pepper notes and those leathery notes that I'm talking about, and a very distinct aroma, right? For example, the Camacho Corojo, somebody's smoking it around me, and I can't see it, but if I smell it, it's very distinct, the aroma that it has.
I think if we touch on the whiskey for a second, Mark.
Of course, yeah. It's interesting listening there actually with the flavor notes that were coming out, especially from Jack when he's mentioned cedarwood. And I've started with the 15. I nosed all three there, and I think we've got it right. 15 Glenfiddich 15 is made slightly differently from your standard 12-year-old. 12-year-old is a marriage of two different casks, European oak or ex-sherry cask and American oak or ex-bourbon cask, and they're brought together after 12 years. 15 there's a brand new virgin oak American in there, and it's held in a large vat called a Solera vat. And in fact, you'll see on these bottles that have been sent out, these are the slightly older ones that say unique Solera Reserve. It was unique until someone copied us, and then we tried to take them to court and realized we hadn't trademarked it. So now we have.
Was that Zacapa?
No, it was actually Loch. What was it? Loch Lomond. Loch Lomond did something called so rum use it. It was in whiskey that we had it as a unique whiskey one. It was inspired from actually the sherry industry and the rum industry, where they are using that sort of vertical system where they're bringing older and newer stock together, but never allowing that bottom cask to empty. So we built a Solera vat at Glenfiddich in 1998, filled it with 15-year-old whiskey, and it's never been empty since. So each time we get it, it's about 30,000 litres. So we drop it down to a minimum of about 10,000 litres. And then we refill with 15-year-old from both, from American oak, European oak, and there's a short finish in American virgin oak. And that brings out that cedar note. So if you look at most of Glenfiddich, when we're just using used American oak, ex-bourbon casks, you've got this buttery note that you'd expect from that type of cask. But because of the virgin oak cask that's put in 15, you get this slightly drier, slightly more perfumed woody note, which I always talk about cedar. So the bells went on when Jack said cedarwood. And it's actually right as when that cigar was first lit, I thought, this might be a bit too powerful. But within 2 or 3 draws, it's sweetened and softened. And those baking spices you talked about, Jack, as well, are just really prominent in there for me. So with the 15, I think it's got the body to hold up to this. Even the residual smoke coming off the cigar now as the room's filling up and nosing the whiskey, there's a really nice partnership coming in for both of them.
Out of the guys that actually are smoking and drinking, what do you guys think of that pairing so far? See, a couple of you guys are outdoors and.
Don't be shy. You can unmute yourself.
Everybody's shy.
Yeah, no, I think it works really well. I mean, I didn't realize the connection with Davidoff, which is my ignorance, but I'd sort of dropped some messages to Nick and said, there's something about the cigar when I sparked it up that just reminded me of a Davidoff, and I can't say in which specific way. So there you go. So there's definitely that pull through that I think that George sort of related to there. And to my post-COVID infected palate, the 15 works really well. I tried it with a 12 as well, but I wasn't quite as taken, if I'm honest. But one man's coffee is another man's tea, isn't it? So I just think the 15 is brilliant.
Good.
Yeah.
I wish we had known, Jack. We should have ordered the package.
We'll do it afterwards and just say that we did.
Right.
Then we'll get a posthumous pairing in.
Yeah.
I quite like the Solera. I have to say, I've just moved to it. I was on the 12 and I've moved to the 15. The Camacho is nice, very nice cold draw.
Mm.
Very good.
I think a lot of the things with, this is obviously an educated group we've got here. So, we know we're looking for those residual flavors. We're not looking for that immediate hit. We're looking for that 15 to 20 seconds after either the smoke's been exhaled or the whiskey's been swallowed. And that's where the magic happens. So that's the sign of a good pairing, where you can get those residual flavors to bind really nicely. The difficulty with single malt or whiskey, Scotch whiskey in general, is that there tends to be less of a sweetness running through a lot of it. We're typically aiming for the distillery character to come through. And Glenfiddich, when it's distilled, has this fresh cut grass note. Before it hits any cask, if you knows the new make, it smells like someone's just mowing the lawn. There's a lot of bright apple note in there as well. Once you start introducing American oak, you're drawing a lot of vanilla or vanillin out of those casks. But of course, the go-to would be a bourbon or a rum, as George was saying there. These wonderfully fruity, rich. I often find that they tend to pull down the cloyingness of the sweetness of those whiskies or rums, spirits. They tend to draw away from the lightness of a lot of cigars. I was in Spain last week and probably smoking 2 cigars a day, which was just brilliant. I was on holiday, so my girlfriend couldn't tell me off. And sitting with a number of different whiskies, at any one time, or a glass of wine. And it was really interesting watching things that worked really nicely and things that I just thought, well, actually, that's really offensive to the palate. And it tended to be things that were sweeter, where the cigar was being lost. I wasn't getting those delicate notes. And I'm really impressed with this. This is the first time I've tried this particular Camacho. I have tried others in the past, which I find are really intense. They're a real punch in the face straight off. This, I find, actually, I think if you, a bit like introducing someone to Glenfiddich, I always go to 15 or really high up 21 or 23-year-old.
It's
and get something subtle.
Entry level cigar, right? And we usually don't really play around a lot with Connecticut wrapper just because this one just really works for us, right? But we had the same success last year with our Camacho, which it was just only a US only initiative. The Camacho Factory Unleashed 2, which was a Connecticut wrapper as well. And it was also, it just opens up a door for those that the majority of people smoke milder cigars, right? There's just, I'm not quite sure the percentage that of people that smoke like full-on bowl Ligero tobacco that gets you dizzy after a while. You have to be on a full stomach. This is it does have a nice little kick to it, right? But it's still very nice and mellow. And I think just it was a great move, and why that, which is why we haven't really messed around with creating many more Connecticut's around that same flavor profile, because if not, then we would be kind of cannibalizing what we've built so far, which is we make bold cigars, right? Flavor profiles, intensities. We play with different strains from all over the world, and we create these blends that all pretty much sit within this realm of blast of pepper, spicy, lots of intensity, very pungent in terms of like some of the blends that we use. But yeah, the milder ones we kind of we already pretty much mastered that with the Connecticut, and that's why we just don't really create anymore, because that one was the one that opens the door for everybody else to come and try different blends that we have.
Yeah, super. I'd love to try this with our 23-year-old Grand Cru, which is a French oak finish, and it's American.
I also would love to. I'll join you.
Yeah.
we can maybe work something out.
I've been lucky enough to try that once. Now, Mark, I have a question for you. When you go to pair something, do you generally go for a pairing that is more complementary? Like you look for one note and try to match that to the same note? Or do you like to try to contrast? Like, okay, I have this beverage that might be a little sweet, or, you know, my Glenfiddich 23 Grand Cru, I might want to pair something a little bit more spicy with that. What's your opinion on pairings?
That's a really good question. I think whether it's pairing with food or cigars, it depends on what I want the outcome to be. So if we're looking at something like 23-year-old Grand Cru, which is so subtle, I mean, it's like a glass of Merceau, you know, it's like good old aged white Burgundy. And so you kind of want complementary things with that, because it's an expensive whiskey. If you're going to pair something with it, you're probably going to spend quite a bit of money with it. It's a luxury indulgence. And so for me at that level, I'm looking for something like this, which is going to be complementary. Both things are going to come off brilliantly on it. They're going to play off each other. If it's more of a flavor challenge and we're having a bit of fun, then I'll potentially look for contrast. So it all depends on what level we're playing with. And also if you've got a range. So we're doing 3 tonight. So, you know, if I was curating this again with different whiskies, I might put one of them in that was completely contrasting, just to show how different it can be. But for the majority of time, I think for my palate, I'm looking for complementary. I'm looking for both things that I'm enjoying to have equal place on the stage, one not to be overtaken by the other.
Nice. For me, it's always a little bit, when I try to make a pairing, I normally, a bit similar to Mark, I look for one who's complementary, one who's contrasting, and one wild card. Just to kind of see, okay, you know, see what it does, and these things can really surprise you sometimes, which is good. Ray, I'm listening to himself. I think he has a question.
Yeah, I was thinking to ask the guys from Camacho. Can you tell a little bit about the story behind Camacho and what's the connection with Davido? Because I think the people might don't know that.
Okay. Check, want me to chime in?
Yeah, I'm gonna let George handle this one, because I just trust that he's gonna miss less detail. I can give you the broad strokes, but George will get in the granular details.
So I mean, Camacho. So it is originally a Cuban brand, right? Founded by a guy named Simon Camacho, right? And evidently, with the exile, he fled and he opened up shop in Miami in 1961. Officially, he relaunched the brand in 1962, hence why we have it on our labels, you know, infamous since 1962. Parallel to this was the AVO family in Honduras, right, which they started harvesting Corojo tobacco, which is the same tobacco that Simon Camacho used in Cuba. In 1990, Simon Camacho passed away, but these two things were running parallel, right? In 1990, Simon Camacho passed away, and the brand remained dormant till about 1995, where the AVO family purchased the rights to the brand, the name, basically. And what better, because they were looking for something to launch this Corojo tobacco here in the US, but they couldn't just get it right, and the brand became available. The family didn't want to do anything with cigars, and they purchased it in 1995. Unofficially, in 1999, the brand was introduced in the US to a small, actually one retailer that had a lot of pull in the New England area, and it was officially, it was a hit. And officially, it was launched here in the US in the year 2000, right? Camacho, Corojo, it was called Get Real back then. Different slogans that we've had throughout the past. So the AVO family had it from 2000 to officially here in the US from the year 2000 to 2008, right? In the year 2008, Davidoff made the move to purchase the brand from the AVO family. And now we've had it for, close to 15 years now, longer than they ever had it. And that's where pretty much Camacho sits now. But the interesting thing about this is just that Simon Camacho had this shop in Miami, and then this whole thing was running parallel with the growing of Corojo and the perfecting of the seed in Honduras of Corojo tobacco in Honduras, which is very susceptible to diseases and different things that pretty much don't let the plant yield as much as they should, right? 90+% yield in Jamastran Valley. There's different areas of Honduras, for example, that have tried to grow Corojo, but they don't have the success that does exist in the area of Jamastran. We're not the only ones that grow Corojo there, obviously, but the seed itself is just it pretty much resonates with the climate and terrain that the seed was used to back in the day in Pinal del Rio in Cuba. So, for example, the Camacho Corojo, it's 100% Honduran Puro, right? Wrapper, binder, and filler Corojo tobaccos, and it's very linear. I would venture off to say there's a very Cubanesque flavor profile to this one because it doesn't trigger the sides of your palate. It's very linear, the front and the back of your palate with peppery notes, so on and so forth. So it's a perfectly balanced blend of the same strain, which is very hard to do because some other brands or some other tests that we've done, when you try to do let's just say Habano tobacco, right, Ecuadorian Habano or something like that. That one it's pretty much has its designated area in the cigar industry, which is the wrapper, right? And then you have the binder and the filler. We've tried in the past to do different tests where it's just all Habano tobacco, but it doesn't have the stimulation in the palate. Where this one, the Corojo strain, all of it, at 100% of the cigar, it does stimulate different parts of your palate, but focus on the front and the back, which is from personal experience and from what I've learned throughout the years, it's a very old Cubanesque flavor profile and a style of smoking. That's pretty much in a nutshell of the history of Camacho. I'm trying to remember if there's any other.
In terms of the branding, when was the rebrand done? Was it 2014?
So 2013, May 2013. Pretty much since we had, we've had the brand for 5 years at the time. We wanted to pretty much relaunch it, right? Revamp it with a new identity. Okay. And that happened in May 2013. And it was just a complete shock for the industry because we went full modern, edgy style instead of the old traditional classic box style. I don't know if some of you guys have had the opportunity to see some of the old branding of Camacho. It was very dull, right? It would get lost in the sea of brown, that we like to call it. And we did get a lot of heat for that. People were, oh my God, what are you guys doing, destroying the brand? And now it's like, looks like the Skittles and so on and so forth, all the different colors. But there was a lot of studying behind this. This was 2 to 3 years in the making where we studied workflows and humidors, the style of boxes, from Camacho back in the day would have 21, 22, 23, 25 count boxes. It was just a complete mess, right? We went down to 20 count boxes and implemented the lacquer finish on the boxes with piano finish, 14 coats of lacquer, which gives it that nice, clean look to it that seems more expensive. But Camacho is a very affordable cigar. And we added the brand mascot, which is the scorpion, very bold, very native to the area in Jamastran Valley in Honduras. And then we eliminated some of the blends that did not make much sense in the portfolio back in the day. And since then, we've trimmed it down to our core lines, right? Which is you have the Camacho Corojo, Connecticut, Ecuador, Nicaragua, Triple Maduro, and there will be a new one coming soon But I was discussing it with Roy. You guys will probably get it later on in the next year or so of that. But those are the core lines, and that's what we focus in comparison to other cigar manufacturers out there that just they pump out different blends every few months, right? Which is confusing to the consumer.
That sea of brown is a really interesting analogy because that happens in whiskey as well. And around about 2011, we're going off brand now, but looking at a brand like Bruichladdich, when they brought out their turquoise painted classic, or it was a 10-year-old when they brought it out, and you know, the whiskey world was in complete shock. I loved it. You know, that's the one
disrupting the status quo,
right?
Disrupting the status, and that's our part of our branding too.
They got rid of it. I'd recommend everyone going on to the 12 now, because you're probably over midway through that cigar. And I've just had a little sip there, and I was worried about the 12 because I thought it might not stand up. But as this cigar has become sweet in that midpoint, that's probably, and this is without a lie, that's probably the best I've ever tasted 12-year-old because the palate's got lots of spice on it now. You've got that slight warmth from the nicotine. There's a coating in there, and what it's done to the 12-year-old is pull out this really rich fruity sweetness in the mid palate. And I think that's it's a total fluke. I'd love to say it was all planned. I'll be dead honest.
You're a genius, Mark.
It's a total fluke. I was kind of thinking, shit, this is not going to go well. And then, you know, the 12 has actually stood up, which I'm happy with. It just shows you how different things can be as you work your way through a cigar and the smoke comes through.
Well, absolutely. I think one thing, now we're on the topic of pairings. There's an interesting pairing which you guys did in the US, George and Jack. I think it was before your time, maybe, Jack. But you matched Camacho with different types of barbecue sauce.
Yeah, it's funny because Jack, he kind of touched on that briefly without even noticing. Between the complement and the pairing, right? So we did two separate things. One for Camacho was with a complementary pairing. We did three different cigars. What do we have? Corojo, Ecuador, and Connecticut with three different barbecue sauces. It was and the idea of is to, and this is during the whole COVID thing where we're doing virtual experiences and all that, and we needed to have people be able to go into your convenience store and pick up these ingredients, right? Which was Jack Link's jerky, right, and Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce. And one of them was the original sauce. Then we had honey mustard and spicy jalapeno something. This is a couple of years back. I don't even remember the sauces now, but those were very complementary, right, to each one of the lines. I think the Connecticut was with the original barbecue sauce, right? So it's not overpowering. The sauce on itself very sweet and had a little hint of spice to it that brought out some of the flavors in the cigar. The one that was it lived that pairing lived to the name of Living Loud was the Corojo with the jalapeno one. That one you would get very, that's like the cigar was that I mentioned before, the front and back of the palate, but some of that jalapeno aftertaste that you would get from this sauce would pretty much coat your palate with that just lingering jalapeno taste, very faint within your palate. So it was a very enjoyable experience. And then the jerky was just the neutral, right? It was the same jerky for all three. Salty, some earthy notes, and those somewhat meaty notes were very interesting. And also that was the medium of getting the sauce. Instead of using just a spoon, you grab the jerky, I
was going to say, what were you just like pouring the sauce in?
Yeah, no. So we needed something.
It's very
right?
American, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, and we're like, should we use chips? No. So we ended up with the jerky as the tool, right? Use somewhat of a spoon to get the sauce in your mouth and coat the palate and so on and so forth. But the contrast
squeeze your bottles, Mark. So
it wasn't squeeze yet.
Yeah, the contrast one was the Avo one. We did for Avo, we did 2 or 3 cigars. We had a little bit of inventory issues at that time. I think it was Classic and Heritage, if I'm not wrong. We had Chaya doing those, most of those. So that was with chocolates, right? It was a dark chocolate, 70% dark chocolate, and I believe it was milk chocolate, if I'm not wrong, that we were doing. But those were the cigars, and coffee as well. We did have cold brew coffee, and the mix of those was very contrasting to the flavor of each blend, right? You would pretty much sense that pretty much between water and oil, right, that don't mix, but it was very good, right? But people would be surprised sometimes as to what the difference of adding different ingredients and different elements would elevate your cigar experience, right? So pretty much the one for Camacho, they were, pair in terms of like the intensity of the sauce and all that. So it would complement and it would enhance the overall experience. And the Camacho, the Avo one would also enhance the entire experience, but you would have 2 different sides, and people would come back and try with the different sauces, different chocolates, and we had 3 different cold brews as well. But that one was more of a contrasting pairing. Hence the name. It was called Harmony in Contrast. The Camacho one was Camacho Cure Sauce and Smoke. The things that we were innovating when the COVID days. But those were very, very interesting. Probably did it, I don't know, I did probably 30 or 40 of them. About 450 people got to try that little thing that we did for Camacho, and then for Avo's probably a couple of the hundreds. And it was very, very interesting. When Jack was mentioning, I'm like, okay, I'll try to, pitch in with that a little bit later. But yeah, it's just that between complement and contrast, there's a big difference, but they're both very appreciated to the palate, right?
I think Nick has a question.
Nick wants to say something.
Question, if I may, yeah. When we were in the COVID period, there was some barrel fermented ones too. I think there was two different flavors.
American barrel aged and the Nicaragua barrel aged, but that was before that already, actually. Yeah.
Oh wow, well, yeah, we did one of those. I remember.
Yeah.
Those we discontinued them. Yeah, we discontinued them. So if you fell in love with them,
it's better, George. It's better to say limited edition.
Yeah.
Are the barrels too expensive?
Just a little marketing tip there.
Yeah, we made tables out of the barrels now.
Yeah, Glenfiddich took all our barrels. That's what happened. We didn't have any more.
It was funny enough that you mentioned that, because somebody found some Nicaraguan barrel aged in Spain, I believe, yesterday. So you either have to
they're still around.
Yeah, in Germany you might still find them, I think.
There's plenty here in the U.S., but we don't produce them anymore, and obviously we've depleted all the inventory that we've had here at the factory and here in the warehouse. But yeah, it ran its course. We launched in 2015. We launched the American Barrel Age. Very successful launch. It's the biggest launch Camacho ever had. And then in 2017, we did the Nicaraguan barrel age, which.
So were these? Sorry, George. Were these ex spirit casks, or they were ex spirit casks? Yeah, Jack.
Yeah, one was bourbon, one was rum.
Yeah.
How interesting.
Yeah. So the original batch was from Bullet bourbon barrels. And then the next one, I think it was
Flor de Caña rum barrels.
No, that was the for the Flor de Caña. Oh my God, I'm drawing a blank. It's a super known bourbon.
Oh, sorry.
Another one, right? Because
I'm really interested in that, because in your opinion, what was the influence of those casks? How did the leaf change?
No, it was what
length of period were they in there?
It was a nuance of flavor, right? They were not fermented in the flavor, so pretty much they were getting the devil's cut out of the barrel, and it was just one leaf of Corojo tobacco that would later on go in the filler. It's not the whole cigar.
Okay.
Yeah, because if not, that would be flavor and it would just be too sweet and the aroma and all that stuff. No, it was like when you picked up a cigar, yeah, you could scent it a little bit, right? But it was more in the flavor profile and some of the sweetness that it would add and the oakiness, complementing the other components of the blend. And on the Nicaragua one was pretty much the same thing. And we're using Flor de Caña barrels for that one. And it was 1 leaf of Corojo tobacco in the filler.
That's interesting. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting because of, obviously in the same way with whiskey, we use finishes. We'll take, matured Glenfiddich and then put it into a cask. Normally for a very short period of time with Glenfiddich. Balvenie a little bit longer, but Glenfiddich's 3 to 4 months.
We did it for 6 months. We did it for 6 months.
Yeah, that's kind of Balvenie terms in there, because Balvenie is quite a sweet whiskey. So you need to finish Balvenie a little. Oh, it's my dogs in the background. You need to finish Balvenie a little bit longer to overcome the sweetness and get an influence of whatever it is you're trying to finish in. But with Glenfiddich being a lighter spirit, typically 3 to 4 months, and you get so much influence. But then we're putting in, in an American cask, 250 liters of spirit, matured spirit, into a red wine cask or a rum cask or whatever it might be. But that's really interesting. It's just a few leaves, just for a short period of time, and it will still bring in drawn in.
Yeah, it was 6 months. It was anywhere from 110 to 120 pounds of tobacco in there, which in the filler, when you do the math, you could probably get anywhere from 55 to 6,000 cigars.
Yeah,
more or less. Yeah.
Sorry, Mark.
No, Ray, go on.
Did you, when you put the leaves in the bottle, did you rotate them somehow, or you just leave them there, seal them, and you open after 6 months?
No. You have to. So it was just traditional fermenting, right? Like when you happen to have seen or have gone to a cigar factory, there's this big pilones, they're called, right? Which they're probably, I think it's like almost a ton, right? In terms of weight. And then those get rotated because every single part of that pilon has to reach the center, the core, which has this natural heating process, right? It gets anywhere from 100 to about 110 degrees. So same thing needed to be done within these barrels. So every 2 weeks, which I saw it was somewhat of a pain in the ass for the guys that had to do it. They had to come, get the tobacco out, rotate it so that every single part of that bale, which is about, like I said, 110 pounds of tobacco, would reach the center, right? So where the heat would, the heating process would occur, and that way it would give it a proper fermentation process within that barrel, getting the devil's cut.
It's what we do with Davidoff with the late hour.
Yeah.
Where we have some tobacco in.
Let's just say we share best practices within factories. Yeah. So it was the same.
But I'm glad you started about casks, Mark. Because you guys released a whiskey in an Awamori cask. Very
recently, the Yozakura, which is a limited edition. Not something, it wasn't purposely discontinued. We were the first single malt Scotch to use Awamori, which, if no one's aware of it, it's a rice wine distillate, which is normally fermented matured in clay casks, really particular to Okinawa. And some of the producers use oak. It's American oak that they bring over and mature the spirit in there. And it's really interesting. The new product, this is how rare it is. The second time I got to try it, I was at the launch and obviously gave everybody a dram. But at the launch, my brain is not thinking about the product. I'm thinking about the guest. So I'm chatting away, and I didn't really register the product. And I asked the business if I could get another dram to try it, and they said no. And I had to go and buy one from the Balmoral Hotel in Edinburgh at £150 a dram. That's how rare it was. And it is, you talk about the Grand Cru being this delicate, buttery, stone fruit. This is everything, all of that, plus a little bit of floral note on the top. It's exactly when you smell a sake and you have those kind of heady, ricey, slightly milky notes. If you imagine sprinkling some lotus blossom on that, it sounds really pathetic, but it is really floral. It's really difficult to describe it. I don't think I've tried a whiskey similar, and I don't think I will either. It was a real exceptional dram, and it would take something, you know, in terms of a cigar, it's going to be something so delicate, so light that, you know, it would be a difficult one to pair with, actually. Although in saying that, when we launched the 26-year-old Excellence about 2014, and Davidoff had opened up their cigar room at the Bulgari Hotel, and I was asked to do a cigar event there, and I can't remember the cigar that was smoked at the time, but Eddie came along, and it was, you know, this is a whiskey that I'd only ever seen the inside of an American oak cask. And when I was asked, I thought, this is far too delicate, you know, and and yet at the end of the night, we were all really surprised. It was just sublime. So I think it's trial and error. We're lucky enough, obviously, we can trial without the error being on the wallet sometimes. And it's slightly harder for a lot of other people. Let's try it, and if it doesn't go well, oh well, you know.
Yeah.
I think
is that why you create the experimental series, to try different stuff, like the cider one, the fire and cane one?
Fire and cane, yeah. I mean, the experimental series with Glenfiddich is exactly that reason. It's a chance to play around with flavor and finishes with that, and that's why most of them are non-age statement, because we're not trying to put something in at a massive price point. It's more about, in our last release was Orchard, which was a Pomona cask finish, which is English. It's like a Pinot de Charente, which is cider mixed with still wine, cognac mixed with still wine. And in Normandy, they mix. This
is the
Orchard you have one. It there, just on point, yeah. And you know, in Normandy, they'll take a Calvados and cut it by using cider. And in England, they do the same. Or a company down in Somerset do the same, the Temperleys, and make something which is really, really appley, fruity, and fresh. And so the experimental series is something for us, which is, it's sort of just a little playground, which doesn't upset the status quo. It allows us to put things out there and kind of go, that was fun. That really worked. But yeah, I was in the distillery yesterday, but I was in there a couple of months ago with Brian, our malt master. And we were in a warehouse, and there basically every cask in there was experimental, and we tried quite a few of them. And you try something; these are all obviously at cask strength, straight out of the cask, so you don't get a true representation of what is in his mind. But what I was really surprised about, there were some incredibly complex things there, and I'm like, "What are we doing with this?" Like, I don't know. We're just learning at the moment, you know. So we're at that point with Glenfiddich where we can. There's over 2 million casks resting up there, which, to put that into context, there's no one in Scotland. There's nobody in Scotland has 2 million casks in one distillery. From one distillery, none. That's about £6 billion worth of duty sitting in Glenfiddich.
Wow.
I think Nick's got a question as well.
Yeah, Nick's put his hand up, Nick.
Yeah. So Glenfiddich, he's one of the last family-owned distilleries. Are you aware of how many there are that are still family-owned?
Well, it depends on how you phrase the question. If you ask marketing or finance, there's two very different things there. If we drew a line, if you think about distilleries that are still in existence when we were built in 1887, so that takes out everything from the sort of 2010s onwards, which were technically family owned or crowd-funded and therefore independent. If you take those out, I think there's 6. So you have things like Springbank. Glenfarclas is still family owned, but actually Glenfarclas didn't build Glenfarclas. They bought Glenfarclas very shortly after it was built, only about 5 years after. So we kind of let them away with that. But realistically, up until the 1960s, There was only Glenfiddich and Balvenie, which we own. Girvan, which is a grain distillery, which we own. Springbank. And then
Planning to buy Springbank now?
No. Because we have Ailsa Bay. So when you look at the portfolio of Glenfiddich, we didn't have a smoky whiskey. We didn't really want to go to an island. So Girvan was built in 1963 to make grain whiskey for us. It's actually a really funny story, and I won't bore you too much with it. I'll make it very short. In the 1960s, Glenfiddich didn't have a grain distillery. You need grain whiskey to make blended whiskey, blended Scotch. And the family at the time, we had Grant's whiskey, which we'd had since 1904, really keen to promote this. And so we'd suggested to some of our suppliers that we were going to advertise on television. Those suppliers being those that eventually became Diageo. And there was a memo apparently, or a telefax put across that said, if you advertise on Glenfiddich, if you advertise Grant's on television, we will cease supply of grain whiskey to the Grant family. It was basically a kind of blackmail. And the Grant family decided that this wasn't quite cricket. So they built in 9 months the Girvan distillery in 1962 to 1963. And it was so advanced at the time. It had atmospheric stills, so it's column stills, but put under pressure. And it was so highly advanced at the time that when they started producing grain whiskey, the individual companies who had basically threatened it's my girl coming home, the dog's now getting overexcited. The individual companies who had said we'll stop grain supply now line up to buy grain whiskey from that particular distillery. So it was a sort of fuck you to everybody in the whiskey industry at this time. and it worked out very well. So I don't think, I mean, I'm not talking on behalf of the Grant family, and I work very closely with them. We have things like Ailsa Bay. We have smoky whiskies. We have the production capacity to make basically any style of whiskey we can at Girvan with Ailsa Bay as well. And then we've started producing smoky whiskies at Glenfiddich and Balvenie again. We used to be smoky. People forget that, you know, up until the 1930s, you didn't really get a non-peated whiskey in Scotland because everything we used was peat to dry the barley. And it wasn't until the rail system improved and the transport system increased that we could find alternate fuels, smokeless fuels, coke and anthracite coming into there, which is why actually most of the islands are still smoky whiskies, because they didn't have bridges bringing trains of cargo across. And we switched over just after, it coincides actually with the American end of Prohibition and the regulation of American casks, you know, trying to restart the industry, trying to get lumberjacks, trying to get sawmills, trying to get coopers back into work, where that regulation of making bourbon said you have to use American oak casks only, and you can only use them once. So of course there was a massive secondhand market in Scotland for that. And we had mostly been dealing with Europe. So ex-wine casks, ex-cognac casks, Madeira casks, but European oak, which actually handles smoky whiskies really well. So Glenfiddich, being a very light spirit, started to use American oak more and more, and then eventually cut the smoke out altogether and became the style that you would know now. The first cask of whiskey ever sold by William Grant in 1887 was actually sold to the doctor in Dufton. It was a sherry butt of Glenfiddich. All of our business up until the 1920s was blended. So William never set out to make a single malt. He set out to make a great spirit that he could sell to blenders. Job done. You know, if the whiskey's in the cask and you sell the cask to someone who's then going to make a blend with it, you get your money. You don't need a sales force. You don't need a marketing team. You don't need a bottling plant and the most expensive thing on your payroll, an ambassador. You don't need any of these. So it's quite interesting looking at how that America actually helped shape what we have as our whiskey now. Non-peated and mostly profiled on American oak.
Very, very interesting. Personally, I don't really like the island, the smoked whiskies at all. But it's interesting about the selling it and making the profit quickly. And of course, in Champagne, they've moved away from selling their grapes to the trend now is for grower champagne. So I know we're getting a bit off topic there, but it's a similar concept.
I was in Cognac about, well, it would have been about 10 years ago, before I started working for Glenfiddich. And I was in one of the houses there, and we were talking, I was working as a contractor for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, which only do single cask whiskies. And we were talking about, they were showing us different casks as the cognac was maturing from specific areas. So Grand Champagne, Petit Champagne, Bomboise. And we were trying these casks, and I said, why don't you just bottle this? And they were appalled by the idea. No. It needs some magic. It needs to be brought together to become a complete product. And that's sort of the way the Scotch industry thought in the 1950s and 60s, until it was Glenfiddich that started selling single malt for the first time over in America. In 1950, it was actually cheaper to buy what we'd call a single malt now than it was to buy a blended Scotch. It was only ever seen as an ingredient. So it's interesting how things change, and that's happening with champagne now, as you say, Nick. It's people are realizing the provenance and the skill to just one house and their nurturing of grapes into the final product, rather than that being pushed off into a blend. And I'm sure it's the same in the cigar world as well.
I've seen some people start lighting the second cigar. Maybe I'll ask George to explain about what we're smoking, a little bit story maybe
I'm already,
as well.
I'm already on the second one. So the Avo Heritage, just a little bit about Avo. He was born in 1926 in Lebanon, right? And he was an explorer of the world, right? I got to meet him a few times in his, later in life, a few years before he passed away in March 24th, 2017. Extremely happy guy. He was a ladies' man. And he was a musician, right? Focused on jazz. He's a pianist. And he always had a love for cigars, right? So in the early 80s, he would play the piano and buy cigars with his own money and put them on top of the piano for whoever wanted to grab a smoke and have a cigar, while he was playing the piano. But he wasn't happy with the construction of cigars. These were mostly Cuban cigars, construction, price, so on and so forth. So, he got this idea through some influence of friends and family to go and try to perfect this, right? Because it was part of his whole thing of the music with the cigars, his passion, and he wanted to share it with the world. And he ended up in the Dominican Republic in the early 80s. He met with Hanky Kellner, which was the master blender for Davidoff at the time. And then in the 1987, they finalized and then they launched the Avo Classic, right? And the Avo Classic was the first one that was actually introduced here in the US in 1988. They sold, I believe, by the year 1995, it was somewhere around 3.5 million cigars, which was a substantial amount. And at that moment, Davidoff decided and offered to purchase the rights of the brand from Avo for a substantial amount of money at the time. He was happy with it. He was going to stay on board as the ambassador and blend creator as well, in conjunction with the folks in the Dominican Republic. And the brand has taken off ever since, right? And Avo was part of every release, every blend. We would share the blends with him just to see if they were satisfactory to his palate. And the last one that he was a part of was the Avo Synchro Nicaragua. That was in 2017. After that, he had some health issues, so he had to stop smoking, and he wasn't traveling that much, so on and so forth. So that was the last one. Everything that was introduced from 1987 when it was created until that date, he was part of, right? And Avo, it's always a brand that we try to connect with music, right? Hence he was a musician, and we try to connect it with music one way or the other. Some of the brands represent musical notes. For example, the Avo XO, some of the lines, the Avo XO line has some of the cigars, Intermezzo, Nocturno. What other ones do we have here? We have Preludio, we have Maestro, Legato. There's different things that have to do with music, right? But this one in particular, this one was launched in 2010, following the launch of a very successful blend that was created that was different for Avo. Because Avo, if you guys have had the Avo Classic, it's a very mild, again, very introductory cigar to those novice in the cigar world. But Avo wanted something with a little more kick to it. And in 2009, there was a limited edition called Compañero. And that one had an Ecuadorian sun-grown wrapper. It was a big hit. So the company decided to create a core line to pay homage to this great success that the Compañero was in 2009. And they and the line Heritage was created. And why Heritage? Because Avo wanted to, like I said, a thank you to all the farmers, blenders, and everybody that was involved in the creation of the brand, and just to celebrate the heritage of the Dominican Republic in terms of cigar making, right? And that's why the name of Heritage. And until this day, in terms of intensity and flavor profile, the Heritage would be the boldest one, the strongest one, the most intense one in the core line, right? After that, we created the Synchro line, which obviously to try to open up the world to more adventurous people and just to try to expand the portfolio. And the Synchro line, it's a matter of personal preference, right? I personally believe that the Synchro Ritmo, which Roy, you guys have that one over there?
We do, yeah.
Yeah. So that to me is the most intense one. It's got 7 different types of tobacco in it. It triggers different parts of the palate. But some others would say that the Synchro Nicaragua will be the most intense, given some of the components that it has. But going back to the Heritage, to me, this one, and I lit it up probably 5 minutes ago. It's very intense in terms of flavor, right? And if you're an Avo smoker, you would see the difference. It's not a blast of pepper and then right up in your face like some of the Camachos are, but it's a refined, intense flavor profile. It's got some spicy notes, some oaky notes as well. It's got some sweet caramel as well. I mean, I'm probably half an inch into the cigar, so it'll transform and it'll run its course. But it's a very interesting medium to full bodied cigar that I don't know. I'm actually curious to see how you guys are pairing it with which ones of the whiskeys that you're having right now, and to hear some of the thoughts on it. But out of the core line, this would probably be my favorite one. Like if you give me a classic XO, we did have the Domain as well, but we discontinued that one. And the Heritage, I would always pick the Heritage. It's got right around my flavor profile.
Mark, what do you think we can pair with this one? If you already started, I don't know if you're already on this cigar. Or
yeah, I was hoping you were going to miss me and go to Roy. I mean, immediately, I had some 18 with the end of the Camacho, which I thought was, the 18's got a lot of sweetness to it. Brings in a lot of sort of baked fruit notes, which really starts to work.
So you went with what you recommended, 15, 12, ended up with the 18.
Yeah, only because I know the 18's got this sweetness to it. And as you get to the end of a cigar and you start to get that really hot, peppery note coming through and you still want to go with it, the 18 gives this lovely, soothing blanket to just allow that smoke to come across the palate. Now I've gone into the Avo and I've only just lit it, so it's a bit hot on the start. But in my head, I'm immediately thinking the 12 is going to lose here. I wouldn't think the 12 is going to stand up to this at all. I might go back to the 15 and look with this and see where we go as it starts to settle down. But this is a tricky one. This is a bold cigar. You know, this is a challenge.
I think if someone wants to try different thing, they can try the Fire and Cane as a start, because you get that not strong but sweet and spiciness with the cigar as well. So that would be the opening whiskey.
We actually I think Project 20 would be really good with this, which is one of the experimental series. There's lots of strawberry and licorice with that. And I think that would actually work. It's also higher ABV at about 53%, 51%, 53%, or 47 actually. I think the one that's marketed is 47. But that licorice note, which is coming in off the starter there, it's not licorice as in confectionery or candy, as they'd say in the States, but actual licorice root, where you get that sweet, woody, spicy, almost fennel note coming through. I think that would be quite a nice addition to this. This is a beautiful cigar. This really is. It's one of those ones that kind of stops you in your tracks slightly. I'm sure, Roy, you know this cigar well, do you?
I've smoked it a few times. Yes. Probably not not as often as George, probably, but.
I don't know, man.
Mark, when you mention flavors like licorice and stuff in the whiskey, how you actually manage to bring that kind of flavors in the whiskey? Because licorice is not any shape or form in the cask in any of spirits, as far as I know.
We have a big room at Glenfiddich, and we have people that we just stand and they add the spices in at the end. No,
that's what I thought.
We don't. You know, it's one of the magic things of oak. We can control every part of, you know, malting, whether we want to add peat in there and get some smokiness in there. We can use different yeasts to set off different enzymes and congeners during fermentation. We can change the mash tun to give us a cloudy wort. We can control all these parts, and we distill and get our spirit off the still in the way that we want it. And then you put it into oak. And at that point, you cross your fingers. You have a parameter. You understand that with American oak, you're going to get less tannin, more vanillin, sweetness. You might get notes of coconut, pineapple, cedar. Then you go into European oak, you might get notes of leather, tannin, fig, you know, dark fruits, raisins, sultanas. But the wonderful thing I think about this is that you're looking at so many different flavor profiles across lots of different casks. And our malt master, Brian Kinsman, he probably goes through, I think he does 200 samples a week. And that's cask samples. And those are at cask strength. So he's looking for various flavors to come out. And that oak interaction with the spirit it's still quite not unknown. Let's say there are parameters you can work with, but there are times when that licorice, that fennel note becomes eucalyptus, which turns into peppermint. And I've tried casks where you literally try the whiskey and about 2 seconds later, you think you brushed your teeth. Mm-hmm. There's a real cool, minty note coming out. And I've said to Brian, where the hell does that come from? He's like, we still don't really know. I wish we could identify that with casks and use that. But, you know, they'll take that single cask and they'll put it into warehouse and they'll let it develop, and he'll bring it out now and again when he's creating something and thinking, you know, this needs a little lick of that cool menthol note, and you'll find that cask and bring it in. And it's one in maybe 2,000 casks that come through. So unfortunately, the answer, Ray, is I don't know, and neither does Brian. I mean, Brian's a chemist, so he probably does, but he doesn't want to tell me the whole chemical compound and the connection to there. But it's the degradation of wood plus the maturation of spirit is such alchemy. And that's the right word to use, because alchemy, I think, falls on the side of magic and luck, and it's just not quite knowing what that cask is going to do. And from that, I think great distillers and great malt masters in the same way that cigar makers are looking at leaf fermentation and bringing those flavors together like a great chef, I think is what makes us do things like this. It makes us come back to things. And someone releases a new whiskey and you think, wow, I'm going to try that because, you know, who knows what journey they've taken to get the flavor profile they want into that glass. So that keeps me in a job. I suppose it keeps us all interested. It keeps me in a job.
Absolutely, same here.
It's funny that you mentioned mint, because I was at your distillery in April, visiting House of Hazelwood actually, and they gave me one of their whiskies, and it also had a very strong minty note. And as you said, it's not something I'd ever tried before.
It's crazy, right?
It kind of took me aback a little bit, because you can't really give it a place. So what is mint doing in whiskey? You know, it's
yeah. I think if you dial it back and look at things like fennel, licorice, they all fall into that same profile. And then you start to look at eucalyptus, and actually there's a connection there in that flavor profile. And depending on what your experience is of those flavors, I know what licorice root tastes like. I know what eucalyptus tastes like. I know what, tea tree oil tastes like. But if you don't, the only reference you have is toothpaste. So it depends on your experience. And bringing that kind of flavor profile into a whiskey it's actually quite not dangerous, but it's quite adventurous, because you really are challenging people's palates to hope they identify that in a positive way. Because if they don't and just go to one flavor profile, then you've lost an audience there a little bit. But it's the thing that really does fascinate me is the oak interaction with spirit. You can plan to a certain area, and then if you've got 2 million casks like we do, that's a hard thing to keep a tally on. But Brian, well, actually beyond Brian, our warehouse management, they're the guys that really tip my hat at, because when Brian says something like, he'll tell them when a cask goes back, really weird, that had kind of fermented strawberry note to it. And they're like, oh, did it really? And they roll it back into the warehouse. And then maybe 6 months later, Brian's like, George, could you that strawberry fermented cask? And he's like, yeah, it's in warehouse 47, it's row 6, and it's 5th cask along. Of course, he's wrong. It's row 7 and 5th cask along. But 2 million casks, and these guys are still able to go, yeah, because it's so unusual that even when they're putting it back in place, or
that's so interesting.
Yeah, it's bonkers. And it's the thing, and I see so many new, coming back to that point of how many are family owned, but so many new distilleries coming out monthly, especially now after the last 10 years of boom in whiskey, where lots of distilleries have released things very quickly, and they have small inventory to work from. What you'll find a lot, I think the industry now is split into two. There's those who are standing by, and this goes back to the Camacho story that George was saying about revamping things and finding an identity. If you are a new distillery, where do you where do you one second, we got a couple of interlopers there. Where do you place your camp? Do you go down the old school? Do you stay traditional? Do you look back at Scotch 10, 15 years ago, where there was very little innovation? We were quite happy to carry on as we did. And then the world around us grew up, and Japan and Mexico and Germany and India, start producing whiskies, in Finland and Italy, and everyone's sort of going, well, but these guys can do it as well. These newer distilleries are then looking at cask finishing and taking those unusual casks unusual finishes, finding new products in oak that they can lay their whiskey down. Rassi is a great example. You know, their inaugural release at Rassi had a 6-cask finish or a 6-cask maturation, bringing in red wines and white wines and rums and still wines as well, in order to take that new spirit and round it out into a modern palate that's acceptable. Or do you go down the route of being dyed-in-the-wool traditional and go, this is our spirit, that's what we want, and this is the way we're going to do it? And you know, a few years ago, I tried 2 whiskies that had been released, one from England, one from Scotland, released pretty much in the same week at 3 years old, and tried them both. And it was quite apparent the English one had gone for the mass consumer. They'd utilized a lot of casks, they'd rounded out the spirit with finishes, they'd created something really fruity. It perhaps didn't show their distillery character, perhaps didn't lay out their DNA, but it was really popular, versus the Scottish one who'd come along and gone, I know we're young and I know we're a bit fiery, and we're probably not what you like, but in 10 years' time, you'll love us. And I think that's a real challenge. But if you've got 2 million casks versus 20,000 casks, we have the advantage of going plus age. We have the advantage of playing around with these casks, finding something with mint or eucalyptus in it, and just using 1 cask in 500 to drive in a really delicate flavor in the background that complements everything that we're putting into that recipe. It's like a chef throwing in fennel at the end or chocolate into a bolognese. That's the same thing, I think.
That's,
but I have to ask you,
interesting.
Ron, did you enjoy the minty cask?
I did, yeah, no, I did. I think House of Hazelwood has some really interesting impressions. And the minty cask, you know, even though initially you're not quite sure what to think of it, but once you kind of had a few sips and you kind of let it round out a little bit more, then yeah, it's actually very pleasant.
And what cigar would you have put that with? There's the big challenge,
That's the
right?
thing, yeah. Well, no, I'm going back in August, so yeah, that might be a challenge to think about. Yeah.
It's interesting that I just want to touch back on that. You said 2 million casks. That's a lot, right? And then I'm just picturing these warehouses, right? Very similar to what we have in our factories, which are the aging rooms, basically. I call them the vaults, right? Because just have these bales of tobacco, 3 stories high, 15, 20, 30 hours full of it. You know, at any given time could be $15 million worth of just tobacco. That's just aging, right? But our thing is so out of these 2 million, is that built on consistency? For example, we have tobacco so that our blends are the same 10 years down the road. And if yes, crop, but the thing there is that, yeah, we purchased some of the tobacco, like the, I don't know, the Corojo we produce on our own, but let's just say the Camacho Connecticut. It's an Ecuadorian Connecticut, right? That we purchase, comes to Honduras, we age it for the X amount of time, right? And it's all to try to keep the consistency so that when somebody picks up, same thing with Davidoff. So somebody picks up a Camacho Connecticut today, and then in 5 years, it tastes the same, right? But you are mentioning some of these experiments and the minty one and some of the other ones. Do you guys are like, oh man, let's put these aside just for whatever reason, and then the majority of it is just to keep that consistency throughout?
George, exactly right. When I said Brian is, sampling 200 casks a week, what he's doing is he's looking for, and I've spoken about this, he'll put out, maybe 100, and he drops enough water in. He'll take it down to about 20% ABV, because the cask strength at Glenfiddich, it goes into cask at about 68% ABV. The industry standard is 63.5, but we do it slightly higher because we don't really sell our cask to anybody else. And what he's looking for when he drops it down to 20% is faults or unusual aspects to that cask. So he'll go along and he's picking a cask up and a sample, nosing, yep, that's what I expect our cask, or that's what I expect that I need to do 12-year-old or 15 or 18. And if he finds something unusual, like a minty cask, he'll put that aside very quickly, just on nose. Oh yeah, minty, right, that's going aside. So he'll end up with a selection of cask samples that he's nosed and approved, and they will be set aside to go further on to be 12-year-old or 15-year-old. And it might actually happen at a much younger age. And that's what people don't realize. We need to make 12-year-old spirit because that's our biggest seller. So we have to have a huge amount of casks that are aging in the way that we want. I was at the distillery many years ago and I was in the filling plant and I was watching the guys empty casks. And I'm there with a cup thinking, I'm going to get, what can I get out of this?
Yeah.
And I said, what's this? They said, it's 9-year-old, we're disgorging, which just means emptying. And I said, we don't do a 9-year-old. They said, no, but Brian's identified 400 casks roughly that are aging too quickly. And to make sure we've got enough 12-year-old, these ones need to come out now and go into another cask, which has been used a few times to slow down the maturation, to stop them taking on wood influence. So,
wow.
Yeah, so you think about that in those terms across 2 million, and 12-year-old Glenfiddich, it's ubiquitous. It's in every corner shop around the world. It's easy to get hold of.
Yeah.
But the process of getting it to just 12 years old is not throw it in a cask and in 12 years we'll take it out. So every cask at Glenfiddich at some point is monitored, tested, managed to make sure it's going to reach its point of destiny. And obviously when you look at 12-year-old, that'll be the biggest bulk of the warehouses. And then you've got 15, then you've got 18. Now we have 32 whiskies on the market, 32 different expressions for Glenfiddich globally.
Wow.
And out of those 2 million, Glenfiddich 12 has a composite of around about 500 casks in every bottle that you try. So there's 500 cask samples utilized in the recipe that makes Glenfiddich 12 what it is, to keep consistency.
To keep the consistency.
Yeah, and that's a long job. I mean, I'm hoping I'll put my hand up if he needs an assistant. I'll take it. Sounds like a great job. But that's one of our biggest challenges. The bigger you get and the wider your distribution, that consistency becomes harder and harder every time.
Absolutely.
And temperature change up here in Scotland. We're getting warmer and warmer every time, whether you put it down to climate change or the warehouses we're struggling for space now. The warehouses are changing. So in the original ones, they were dunnage warehouses where they were only 3 casks high, stone built, soil floor, slate roof. Now we're palletized, 11 casks high on pallet. The temperature at the base of those warehouses is very different from the top. The maturation then changes. All these things have to be taken into account when you're looking at something as simple as a Glenfiddich 12-year-old.
Wow. That's so interesting.
It's a good problem to have, though,
It's better than having no casks. Speaking about Rassi, I was on Rassi a few years ago, and this gives you scale of a modern distillery. And they just had a new grain hopper arrive, and it took 25 tons, this grain hopper, which is 1 truck of grain. And the manager was showing me around, and I was getting the no holds barred tour because it was him and I. And Rassi is minute, it's 5 years old. And he was so proud of this new hopper, this grain intake. And I looked at it and went, wow, that's really cool. He says, we just get the old one being 2 years old. Wasn't really fit for purpose. Now we've got this thing and it's a beast. I said, and what does it hold? 25 tons. I said, how long will that last you? He said, about 2 weeks. Then he paused and he went, how long would that last Glenfiddich? And I said, till about 11 o'clock in the morning. We do 114 tons of grain a day.
Wow.
And they do 25 tons in 2 weeks. Now, the bigger problem there is, how then do you keep consistency on that scale of production? So
That's
we might
that's insane.
we might
Yeah,
be
I
big,
mean,
but we still care.
yeah. And no, it's funny because like our Camacho factory, right? It's anywhere from 100 to 120,000 cigars a day, right? That's quite the operation. And remember, these are literally a wrapper, binder, filler put together, inspections, 7 points of inspections, and then all that. And then I go and see the boards, I'm like, wow, 700,000 cigars in this, just this week alone. It's insane, the amount of labor that goes, and not just to make them, right? There's a lot of work that goes behind it to make sure that once it gets to the roller's table, it's the same consistent. They just got to make sure that they put the recipe together, but it's the cigar will taste the same, as the same one that they rolled 5 years ago, per se. It's
Bonkers.
mind-boggling.
Do you not sometimes wonder that, if you could, for your average consumer, and I'm sure, Roy, you've got the same, for your average consumer that comes in and spends money, whether it be a cigar or rum or sherry, your average consumer on the high street, when you stand in a liquor store or a cigar shop and you hear the conversation going on, you kind of want to just vomit out all this information, right? Because you want people to go, do you know what you've just purchased? Do you know how much skill and effort has gone into this? I think cigars, luckily, still have this hierarchy of luxury that whiskey is only just edging into now. But I would imagine if I went an hour and a half north of here, I'd be in Gleneagles Hotel in Scotland, which is, one of the most premium hotels in the world. And if I sat down at the bar, there'd be someone ordering a scotch that would only be ordering it because of the price tag next to it on the menu. And there's
Very
nothing wrong
similar
with that.
to cigars,
Right, right.
Yeah, when you, like, for example, Camacho or Avo, mostly Camacho, right? Because it's not an expensive brand. Here in the US, you're talking about, I don't know, $9 to $10 per se, right? And some people really bitch about it. They're like, why is this expensive? There's this other one here for $5. They smoke the same, blah, blah, blah. But then that's where you're talking about, like, trying to vomit all this information. It's like, how many hands? Do you know how long it took for that? This, the aging, the construction, and then all the stuff that goes into it for you to just pay $8 for it. But the aging part is very, very critical, right? Because you're buying time. Funny because I was looking at some plants for my backyard, and then they have the 7-gallon ones, which are whatever, $25, but then you have some other ones that are bigger, and they're $100, $150. And I'm like, okay, the only thing here is the same plant, but yeah, I'm buying one that somebody has been sitting on for 5 years, right? So you're buying time, basically. Yeah. And that some of the cigars that are aged X amount of years, like we have, I don't know, it doesn't have anything to do with the price, but the new Seasons series that we have here in the US for Avo, each one of them has a filler that's been aged for 14 years, right? And that it's something that it's very important. You have the Davidoff 10th anniversary, right? That combined has about like 45 years, yeah. 45 years of tobacco in there, all combined. It's time, right? That you're purchasing, and that's the ultimate luxury.
If only we could find a way to let people know that was how we all felt.
We do these things, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
but having things like this, having people together that appreciate that, this is exactly what this is. This is a group of individuals that understand, appreciate, and want to learn. And I've learned lots of this evening. Just to further appreciate those things that you spend time doing. And a cigar takes time. I don't mean just to create it. The amount of times you have to sit down and have to think ahead and go, I'm going to take 45 minutes out of my life and sit down and enjoy this, I think it's alien to a lot of people. And I'm based in Edinburgh. If I go down the road here, by 10 minutes, I'll find a bar that's selling 12-year-old Glenfiddich for £2.75 for 35 mils. Do they care how long we've taken to get that right? No. It's malt of the month. They're like, give me a half beer and that dram, and I'm on my way.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because like and the cigar, I don't know, the liquor is just so much bigger, right, than the cigar industry, but they go hand in hand. But the camaraderie that goes behind the cigar culture, right? Like you go here to any cigar lounge in the US, right? You may have the male guy enjoying his cigar, right? And right next to him, you may have this multimillionaire guy that just sat down there, parked his Ferrari up front. They're smoking the same cigars. There's a common grounds for them to share because the flavor profile will be the same. Not that the guy has a more intricate palate just because he's got millions of dollars in the bank. It's common grounds and they can talk about it. That happens to me all the time. I've rubbed shoulders with people that would have never had, if it had not been for the cigar industry, right? And it's something that is like neutral grounds, right? Conversation starters. And you may have a great conversation for 45 minutes to an hour with somebody that otherwise you would have never talked to.
Yeah, I think whiskey is a great leveler. There's a wonderful bar in Speyside, about 4 kilometers south of Dufton, called the Highlander Inn, and it's a real traditional pub. There's no bones about it. It's run by a Japanese guy who used to look after Auchentoshan and a couple of other whiskies. It was at one point the biggest collection of Japanese whiskey outside of Japan. And this is right in the heart of Speyside. And you go there and you'll sit at the bar and no one talks about whiskey. That's the thing. You just sit down. And a great example of this, I sat down one night and I was having a dram and a pint. I was kind of off shift. And next to me was the master distiller for Glen Grant. And behind me, eating fish and chips and having a pint of Guinness, was the flavor profile master for Macallan. And you just think, well, this is what it's about. Doesn't matter where you've come from.
That's an actual position, flavor profile master. Wow.
Yeah. Fish and chips and a Guinness.
Wow. I'm gonna take note of that.
I think that makes us, no matter where we end up in life and what we do in life and the jobs we have and the roles we have and the advantages we have as well, I think there's a leveler for all of this. The worlds that we've grown up in have changed the attitude towards both whiskey or spirit, drinking in general, food, cigars. But actually, when you get down to the bare bones of it, we're all just looking for a little slot of time where we can enjoy things together, irrespective of your background, your paycheck, or your understanding of that product. And I think that's really important for all of us to remember. I certainly do as an ambassador. I go to tastings sometimes and guys come up to me who look like they've, stolen the car they've come to the venue in. And they stand and show me their incredible whiskey collection. They've probably spent 10 times more than I've ever spent on whiskey. And yet, to look at them, you'd think, well, why are you here? Now, it's a great leveler, and I love the industry for it. I love all this end of the industry for it.
Absolutely.
Very true. Yep. So you got us all quiet, Mark, with your.
It's unusual for me to go quiet. I got very philosophical there, Roy, for a second.
I know, yeah. We're all taking it in.
No, it's
I think we've been going for about an hour and a half now. I think I've got maybe 1-2 more questions for George and Jack. More about, you said Avo was a musician. And how do you still bring that now to life in the US, for example, to keep that link between Avo and the music side of it?
So always, again, Avo always with music, right? And every year we try to create some sort of activations, experiences around the music. This year, what we are running, it's an activation called Avo Hi-Fi Experience, which basically we're sending out a colleague of ours, which is a DJ, right? Going into about 50 or 60 different locations throughout the US and creating an after hours lounge. Basically, that was the idea, although a lot of the guys are doing it during business hours. But the idea of it was to create this after hours, you close up shop, dim the lights, get some candles going on the tables, you know, low lights, nice music, very speakeasy style. That was the idea. It's not really going that way, but the experience, the essence of the of what we're trying to do is there, which is tie the brand Avo Cigars with just the quality of sound. And I mean, some of these playlists are amazing. Actually, if you go on YouTube, you go on, you search for Avo Cigar, our YouTube page. There's about 6 or 7 playlists there that are about an hour and change each, of some of the stuff that's being played throughout the US right now. And that's the idea for Avo, right? Always tying it up with music. Next year we have some ideas of actually creating some live performances as well. And then not just music. So Avo is always about art as well, right? The art of each individual field that we want to go into, right? That being music, that being actual art in terms of painting and stuff. Try to bring the art of making cigars with another type of art and collaborating with it. And that's the expression for that year, right? This year, like I said, is the music in terms of just creating a music experience in all these retailers throughout. And then for Camacho, well, we got Jack on the road now. As you can see, he's got his little banner back there. The Camacho off the grid. The idea of this was to create, try to engage with the off-road community, right? So Camacho is very bold, unmistakably loud, unapologetic, and what best to tie it up with, because we've done the motorcycle thing for years. We're trying to phasing out of that and going into a different aspect of living loud, right? Which is off-road vehicles. And that's the idea. So we're trying to aim in each one of these locations to collaborate with an off-road community, right? To come into the store. And then there's also a food component to it as well. So, I mean, Jack, if you want to elaborate on the food part, because that's
yeah, I mean, us Americans are big on our barbecue. So it's, you know, fire is inherent to cigars. So we're combining fire, you know, slow smoke barbecue in a lot of our cigars and all of our experiences. So I'm traveling around with a pit master, and we're hitting, you know, the lower 48, all the different states and areas, and trying the best that barbecue has to offer in each of these areas.
How much weight have you gained since you started doing that?
5 pounds. I really have to start running a lot more. I didn't think it was going to be this bad, but it's hard to say no.
Yeah, I mean, for Camacho last year we did the Bold Burger Battle, which was we had this renowned chef from Miami that came on the road with us, and we did activations throughout the US with burgers, right? And he would bring his signature burger, and then we would partner up with either the owner of the establishment or their like best burger spot in town, and they would battle, and then people would actually, you know, rate the burgers, which one was best, blah, 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 the whole thing. So Camacho is always, we're always trying to think outside the box, but I think the food component, I don't know, maybe next year, Jack, we'll do tacos or something, but the food component aspect of it, it ties very well with cigars.
Maybe a full English next year, you know, a real proper.
Yeah, I
think Mark was on to win the fish and chips and Guinness. I think that's
that's a good idea.
Yeah, featuring triple Maduro.
yeah.
Well, one of the ambassadors, actually going back to Bruichladdich, one of the ambassadors there did a whole run last year of crisps, chips, you call it in America, and she paired. Our whole tastings were done on really different crisps and chips with Bruichladdich. So there's scope there. Definitely scope. Maybe a dip into some.
Well, I've seen a U.S. Glenfiddich ambassador, Dave Paradise, DJ Paradise, does a lot of music and Glenfiddich sessions, which I've enjoyed over the years.
Whiskey sounds good.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. He's a riot, that boy.
Yes.
And likes his cigars as well. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's how we know each other.
Yeah.
That's
Great
awesome.
guy. Great guy. It's super.
Good. I think we'll tie it to an end, if that's okay with you all.
One last thing, Roy. Sorry. I know we didn't really pair a whiskey with that last one, but I'm sure everyone had something, or I hope you had something left in your glass. The 12, I'm right, it just didn't work. I think the 18 with the Avo was the winner all the way through there. Quite a short cigar. I think the 18 provided quite a lot of sweet notes, that kind of baked fruit, Christmas cakey kind of note. I think that was the one for me that worked. I don't know about what anybody else's thoughts. That's a beautiful glass that Jane has. I know it's not Jane, but it's Jane's iPad. It's a lovely dark cut crystal there you've got. Looks very
it's a Winston Churchill.
It is.
Yeah.
It's one of Roy's Churchill Davidoff cigar glasses. It's very nice. I go with you. Can I just ask one question about the cigars, if that's all right?
Sure.
In terms of the Avos and the Camachos, do any of those lend themselves naturally to aging? I mean, I know some of them have got age leaves with them, but we hear a lot, obviously, about Cubans being aged, and quite a bit about Davidoff, but it kind of ends there, doesn't it? There isn't really a conversation about other cigars being aged. But in respect of AVO and the Camacho, are there any of those within the portfolios that lend themselves to aging, and to being put aside and would benefit from it, or indeed would develop?
So for Camacho, yes, right, and it's mostly depending on which blend, right? So I let's just say for the Corojo, right, which is the one that I was smoking. There's three different components, and there's three different parts of the aging to that, right? And I would say that at least the wrapper, for example, it's aged 4 to 5 years, right? And then depending on the flavor profile of the binder and the filler, those are anywhere from 2 to 3 years. So it's nothing that we've aged them for 15 years, because it's not part of what we're trying to accomplish with that. Because obviously with that, you would probably have to add a price tag to that. Again, you're buying time. And for Avo, it's about the same, right? The wrapper at least is 4 to 5 years at least. We're not going to put a wrapper that is 2 years old. And the binder, it's around the same. For example, the Avo XO, most of the tobacco, I would say the binder and the wrapper on the Avo XO, for example, it's aged at least 6 years, right? So there's but we don't see those as key selling points, right? Because it's just part of the process. We don't speed up the process, but we don't brag about it, because I mean, like we were mentioning with the Davidoff Nicaragua, that is something to talk about, because there's 45 years combined in that one cigar. But if it's something is, to us, the standard is probably on the wrappers, it's at least minimum of 5 years for the wrapper.
Yeah, I would say just to add my 2 cents, we work really, really hard so that when it gets to your door, it's ready to be smoked. I'm sure George has collected a lot of Camachos throughout his time. I've been lucky enough to smoke some really old Camacho products, and I would say it really holds up, and it adds maybe a little bit more subtle notes or a little bit more complexity. You can age anything, but you don't necessarily have to. You can enjoy it, day one.
Yeah, they're ready to go by the time it gets to you. In terms of obviously, hoping that after it left our warehouse, that being here in the U.S. or in Germany or in Switzerland or whatever, after that the cigar was properly taken care of in terms of humidity and all that stuff. Remember when you age it for a long period of time, if it's not in the right condition, some of those the oils and some of the flavor profiles of the tobacco may, start to decline in terms of the intensity. And we want our cigars to be intense and ready to kind of like explode in your palate. So yeah, I mean, you could age. I have some of the original Triple Maduros back from 2007. Prior to the revamp, part of my job was to go out into the country and buy just old Camacho, so that when we actually launching the new revamped boxes with the same blend, people wouldn't get confused and the whole 9 yards. So I do have some from time to time. I come across one of my humidors at home and I'm like, oh man, look at this Camacho. It's 10 years old. It's lighted up. And yes, although the flavor profile is there, but some of that intensity, that that we're known for, it's not there, right? So I would actually just kind of be careful in terms of Camacho and in general, right? Cigars tend to decline because it's just they're leaves, and if you don't, I guess if you were to like seal them completely, which is not your typical humidor, yeah, they may keep some of the characteristics, but for the most part, once you get the cigar, enjoy it, yeah, save a few that will last you a few months. But yeah, at least our cigars are not the ones that it's like, yeah, they need aging for 2-3 years. No, they're ready to go. We did the aging for you.
I smoked an Avo cigar 2 weeks ago. It was the 80th anniversary.
Oh, the 80th? Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh.
So that was 2006, was it?
What is it? Yesterday, the day before yesterday, I enjoyed the remember when we did the 30th, the Avo 30th anniversary, the double Corona.
Yeah.
It was the limited edition. Oh, what an excellent cigar. That was so excellent. But that one was already mild enough back in 2018.
Yeah.
A couple of days ago, it was just, it was great, it had flavor profile and everything, but it didn't have that little that I care for. So
no, I
that's awesome.
I had a box of the 80th anniversary, and I went to an event with a group of friends. So I brought the box and I handed it out to my friends. And afterwards, 2 people asked me where they could find the box.
Oh, come on.
Good luck.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck. So and if you find it, you're gonna pay a
exactly. Did anybody have any more questions for either Mark or George or Jack?
Just
when you put his camera on, I knew he was going to have a question.
Yeah, just to check. So I'm here. I've enjoyed the 18 very much with the AVO. I'm outside the pub. I'm away on business, so I am surreptitiously topping up my glass without the landlord looking. But no, lovely, great, love it. Wanted to check. So I should really smoke my limited double Corona Avos now, should I? I've got a couple in the humidor I bought a little while ago, but don't leave them too much longer. I think is what you're saying.
Is it the 2018?
I think so. Yeah. It was one I bought a year or so ago, 2 years ago, maybe.
Really 2021 was a double.
It might be, yeah.
Well, yeah, no. So we have a 21.
Yeah,
right.
It was
that was a double
Corona
as well.
Yeah.
Okay, that was 21.
Yeah.
That one should
my
be
mistake.
That one should be ready to go. That one should be ready to go.
Sooner rather than later.
I actually have a box at home, and here we have them hidden somewhere. Those were excellent because I love longer cigars.
Timing.
I'm not really a fan of Robustos, or unfortunately the short Robusto you guys had. I'm a quick smoker. Like you can tell in an hour and change, I've smoked 2 Toros, and I'm almost done with this Toro here. So I like longer cigars, but that double Corona, the 2021, that was an excellent cigar.
Okay,
and it's not a very usual format for Avo. We should try to do our limited editions in smaller formats and so on and so forth. But yeah, that one should be ready to go.
I shall save it for another business trip. Thank you.
I think the question was more not that if they're ready to smoke, it's more how long can you still keep them? In the terms of
that
aging,
one,
yeah.
That one you could probably keep it another couple of years. A good 4 years. That's a good time frame that I like. Personally, you can keep it in terms of a collection and then brag about it 10 years from now. Like a lot of people do. But yeah, in terms of like you enjoying what a cigar was meant to be, either now or you could probably wait a couple of years, as long as they're properly taken care of in the humidor. They're like babies, right? So you have to like make sure that the temperature doesn't hype up or come down, or in the humidity and all that stuff. So I would either enjoy one now and then maybe in a couple of years try another one and write notes about it and see, just kind of like it's a very personal experience, right? Just the art of smoking a cigar. Everybody's palate is a little different, so what may work for you now in a couple of years may actually be great for me, but you'll be like, oh no, I wanted something a little more intense from this cigar. So it's very personal.
Excellent. I shall try and find the time to smoke it. But mainly with me and double Coronas, it's just finding that time because with all the kids and everything about it, tends
You
to be
need
business
time.
trips.
You need time.
Yeah.
You need time.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Cheers.
that's a great smoke, man. Enjoy it when
Thank
you do.
you. I will. Cheers.
Alrighty.
Thanks, JT. Mark klopt hem uit.
Oh, if there's no,
Yeah,
there's no
sorry.
That is okay.
More, any
Ray?
more questions? No one.
JT, your wife made a good choice there. Try it with a beer. You just put a comment up. I've just noticed in the chat
IPA.
the IPA finish from the
Yeah,
experimental series.
Can't complain. It was a very good birthday present.
But it was specifically made to match with beer. So in Scotland, we have a thing called a Hoff and Hoff. A small beer, whiskey on the side, not a depth charge, not a boilermaker, not a chaser. Alternate between the two, find a beer that works with it. For my thing, it works really well with a Scottish IPA, which is a oxymoron, but anyway.
Okay, well, I will look out for something like a brew dog or something less.
Maybe not brew
commercial
dog.
than
But yeah, try it with a beer on the side, and something with a bit of malty hoppiness to it, nothing too citrusy, and it's a great whiskey to have on the side of a beer.
Okay, I will do that. Interesting. I picked up a couple of days ago it's an Eines and Gun, but with Lafroig cask, so that might be too much with it. But yeah.
It's a high
Stephen works for Eines and Gun.
It's a high ABV, so it's
7.5.
and that's what you have to watch. Yeah, it's that.
Probably too much.
Maybe slightly. Yeah,
Stephen, want to pitch in?
Yeah. Good.
Yeah,
thanks.
Of course, I'm going to say get stuck into that. That's the one thing. The one thing I would say about that is it's surprisingly smooth. I tried that whiskey when it's first launched. Didn't think it was going to work, and it works extremely well. The balance is incredible on that. I pair that regularly with cigars, and it does work fantastically well. So, with or without your cigar, but you'll enjoy that beer. That is for sure. And and if I can just say, we've also got an incredible stout coming out in November, which is an 11% stout, aged just over a year in Glenlivet casks as well. That's one to look out for as well. But 11%, that's a big challenge. But I couldn't agree more with.
Eines and Gun's standard lager, JT, get hold of that. Just their standard lager, which is not actually standard at all. It's a wonderful, balanced, slightly hoppy edge to it. That lager that you get from Eines and Gun with IPA can't go wrong.
Thank you. I will look out for it. Cheers.
Everybody's a winner. There we are.
Awesome.
Good.
It's certainly been great to meet you all. What a
really
wonderful.
This is great. I love these.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Jack, and thank you, George.
Likewise, Mark. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good rest of the day, and hope to see you all soon.
All righty, guys.
And Ray, thank you very much for putting this together. Maybe next time we do like a 21 and upwards and see what the cigars get pulled out as. See what.
We'll do a private session, Mark.
Let us know.
Share it with the people. It's for everyone.
Right. Have a good night, everyone.
All right, guys.